I must make a confession. I'm an opera lover. And this year is actually the 200th anniversary of the birth of both Verdi and Wagner. And so I felt the need to include this into my talk somehow. Luckily, in Wagner's music drama Rheingold, some passages illustrate extremely well what I'm trying to say. Here, the gods are dependent upon a certain technology which enables them to stay young and strong. The technology they are using are Freya's golden apples. And we human beings are permanently using some sort of technologies in order to reach our own goals. Obviously, these technologies have not always been there. So we need to remember that 250 years ago, we didn't have vaccinations. 200 years ago, we didn't have reliable anesthetics, and 150 years ago, we didn't have antibiotics. So I'm very happy that we're having all these pharmaceuticals nowadays, because I think many of you wouldn't be here now without them. So all of them can actually count as our golden apples. So the question is, now we're again in the present, in a very special situation, and we have to deal with new technologies. And we have to wonder, so what about the genetic enhancement which we are confronted with? Are they actually our golden apples, or are they rotten apples? And many people think they are. So there's a fear of some irreversible consequences of genetic alterations. Maybe they even lead to some human extinction if some virus is spread out all over the world. Are we playing God if we make decisions about genetic alterations? Is it a hubris? Is it human arrogance if we play around, mess around with our genes? And I've been concerned with, and they're all very important questions, I've been concerned with them for a long period of time. And it all started off with me actually getting interested in Nietzsche. And he was a philosopher I've been concerned with from a very young age onwards. Actually, I think I started reading him when I was about 14, and then I've been reading all of his books until the age of 20. And it's still the case that whenever I'm tackling a new question, I firstly look into what Nietzsche has got to say, because he challenges all your deep-rooted prejudices. That doesn't mean I'm always in agreement with Nietzsche, but by challenging with his sort of questions, I actually manage to find a better answer to all the difficult questions we are facing now. And I think his remarks concerning anthropological questions are particularly relevant for our age. He has presented an understanding of a human being which is radically in contrast actually with the dominant Christian and Kantian conception of it. And in this tradition, it's been upheld that human beings are categorically above all the other natural entities and separated from them. And according to his understanding, human beings are actually integrated in our natural world, though they are merely gradual differences to all the other natural entities. And he's presenting a very dynamic worldview, and he's considering also evolutionary thought. So it's clear that whatever has come about, it's at least unlikely that it will stay so. So eventually some further change will take place. And this obviously also applies to human beings. So there are two options available. Either there's the option of extinction, or there's the option of taking another step, of developing into an overhuman. And these sort of thoughts are being dealt with at the moment as well in contemporary debates, and particularly by transhumanist scholars. And now they're not talking about overhuman. Now the contemporary notion, which is most often be used as a concept of the posthuman. So I got extremely interested in all these questions, and about 10 years ago, then I started reading. I was reading a book by Habermas, who's one of the most important German philosophers, and he wrote about liberal eugenics. And I was particularly fascinated by one of the phrases in this book, in which he rejected that genetic enhancement and traditional education are actually parallel procedures. And then it started me thinking about whether this is actually the case, because I started to realize, well, on the one hand, well, there are actually quite a few similarities which directly come to your mind. Well, the parents, they're making decisions about the alteration procedures of the children. Then furthermore, these alteration procedures are clearly, they're supposed to be in the interest of the children, in the best interest, so that it enables them to lead a good life. So the initial analogies are already quite striking. But Habermas pointed out, and he had exactly two worries in mind, which are probably particularly important, that genetic alterations are always irreversible. On the other hand, educational alterations are supposed to be always reversible. In that case, during that period of time, and still nowadays, I'm reading a lot of scientific journals, I'm reading blogs on the internet, and I'm talking to many scientists. So eventually I came across the following story. There was a 23-year-old British male, and he suffered from an inherited blinding disease. He went to London, he had a gene therapy, which is actually extremely successful. Because afterwards he had an increase of vision, and there were no apparent side effects. And that clearly shows that actually altering the genes can be a reliable procedure. There doesn't have to be any side effects. It's just a matter of experience, of further training to get it done in an even more reliable fashion. But it also showed to me that Habermas was clearly wrong. Genetic alterations are not irreversible. And then it started me to investigate further whether he's right concerning his claim concerning education. And so I came across, well, I was thinking about psychological procedures. And it's clear that acquired psychological diseases like post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessional neurosis, the borderline syndrome, they are all caused by environmental causes. And so that's why whatever is being brought by environmental causes, it also applies to the case of education. And most of these cases actually lead to irreversible consequences, or at least in many cases it can lead to personality states which are irreversible. But one doesn't even have to refer to these psychological diseases. One can get further intuitive support by some other reflections. For example, just if you're thinking about human beings learning to ride the bike, tie their shoelaces, play the piano, speak their mother tongue, I mean, in all of these cases, it's such that even if you move into a different country, or if you haven't practiced the piano for a longer period of time, it can be impossible for you to completely get rid of the capacity you've acquired before. So this clearly shows that educational causes can also lead to irreversible states. So it's the case that both educative as well as genetic alterations can have reversible as well as irreversible consequences. And which therefore Habermas' strongest refutations clearly need to be rejected. And we've got strong reasons why it's actually the case that education and genetic alterations are actually analogous processes. And if they are analogous processes, then we've got also a way of approaching these new procedures. Because we've got clear values in the case of education. And we can then simply transfer the values and apply them to the cases of genetic enhancement by alterations. It's actually sort of one of my special approaches by always trying to find these structural analogies, which I've been learning from ancient philosophers. So it's always a quest for looking for structural analogies between established procedures and emerging processes, so that one has a plausible way of approaching these new processes, because otherwise one is mostly puzzled when one is confronted with them. So thereby one is also have some established values, and they can be applied to these emerging technologies. And you can do this in another case of genetic enhancement as well. Well, there's been an intense public discussion in Germany concerning the use of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis in the previous years. And just let me briefly describe what all of this is about. So, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis can be used sort of after parents have, well, here I'm writing parents decide which fertilized eggs after in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis get implanted. So what does this mean? In the UK, it's the case that 50 to 60 eggs get taken from a woman. All of them get fertilized, and then in the end, only 3 of the fertilized eggs get implanted. So you have to make a choice, 3 out of 60. And pre-implantation genetic diagnosis has been developed in order by investigating which qualities are actually associated to the various fertilized eggs. You can take out one of the fertilized egg cells and then investigate it genetically. So it's a question of in how far it's morally and legally legitimate to apply these procedures in the case of during the process of selection. In Germany, it's been decided that only in very specific cases it can be applied. Only if there's an extremely high risk of the child being handicapped, the parents are allowed one type of this procedure. Which is really strange, because during the debate, it's always been pointed out that one needs to, during the debate concerning the use of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, it's often been pointed out one needs to avoid it because it leads to a stigmatization of the handicapped people. And now the German court's ruling, oh, you can only use that procedure in order to avoid children being handicapped. So that it really sounds to be a highly problematic way of ruling out this procedure. In that period of time, then it led me to think what actually is an appropriate concept of being handicapped, what is an appropriate way of enhancement, and I was confronted with the following case. So in the US, there was a deaf lesbian couple, and they on purpose wished to have a deaf child by choosing a deaf sperm donor from their deaf community. Maybe some further information is needed. Well, the couple, they were both teaching at a university, and the university, they're mostly deaf people were hired and are working there. So they're part of a deaf community. And from their perspective, it's actually such that deafness is not a handicap, but deafness is merely a difference. Actually, they were thinking if the child grows up in the deaf community, it's actually in their advantage. Initially, I was surprised and shocked about sort of these reflections, but after I thought about it, actually, I think it's a morally legitimate choice because it's in the end, it's not a child which had harmed. It's a matter of a different child being selected, a different child coming to life. But just by having these reflections, I also started to realize a further analogy. So choosing a procreative partner actually seems to be structurally analogous to the procedure I've just been pointing out, to the procedure of selecting a fertilized egg after in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So one of the clear indications for this, so if you choose a partner with whom you wish to have offspring, you thereby determine 100% of the genetic makeup of the child, because, 50% come from yourself and 50% come from your partner. By choosing a fertilized egg, you also determine 100% of the genetic makeup of the child. Well, actually, it's not a kind of determination, because you also need to take into consideration the recent research in the field of epigenetics. And it shows that by means of stress, education, drugs, medicine, or diets, they can actually lead to epigenetic changes, which can be responsible for the alteration of the activation or silencing of genes, also of the alteration of gene structures. And all of this can have significant effects on the qualities associated to the respective genes. So actually, by choosing a fertilized egg, you don't determine the genetic makeup in a specific way of the child, but you only choose a certain range of genetic possibilities. And that's just the same as when you choose a partner for procreative purposes. You only choose a certain range of genetic possibilities. So this research is a clear indication of choosing a partner for procreative purposes, and this choosing a fertilized egg are actually, again, structurally analogous procedures. And we know how to deal with them from a normative standpoint. I mean, we know how to apply the norms to the field of selecting a partner. And so we've got a reason how we can transfer and apply them to this new field of an emerging technology. We also know that, talking about the traditional procedures, selecting a procreative partner and traditional education are obviously extremely important for promoting the good life or the likelihood of your child leading a good life. And as it's the case that by means of genetic enhancement, you can actually alter very specific qualities. It might be even more efficient procedure of increasing the likelihood of your child leading a good life than the traditional technologies I've been talking about. So if the structural analogies apply, which I've been talking about, it's clear that genetic enhancement can also be our golden apples. Of course, only if we apply them appropriately, because it shows they're simply a continuation of all the technologies we've developed before. And I've been talking about all these wonderful developments from vaccinations to antibiotics. And genetic enhancement is not a radical break, it's just a further step in this continuous process. Because we've always been working at technologies which help us living better lives. So genetic enhancement have enormous potential for increasing the likelihood of us living more flourishing lives. Thanks a lot.